You are now listening to EdYOUcate, the most fired up educational podcast there is. EdYOUcate is all about the quality education access to students and how we can provide research-based solutions to free the young minds of the world. On this podcast, we will be exploring different educational experiences, education's greatest of debates, and more. The hottest educational podcast out. EdYOUcate is brought to you from the Albany State University's very own Center for Educational Opportunity. Enjoy.
Today, our discussion will be about teacher leadership, STEM education, diversifying the teacher pipeline, and discipline in schools. We have a special guest today with us, Casey Bethel. If you could please just introduce yourself to the listeners and just tell them more about you and what you do.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jamila. First, everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. Before I introduce myself, I want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this podcast. The work that's happening in the Center for Educational Opportunity and at Albany State is transformative for our communities, for the education industry. Dr. Kathaleena Monds is a giant of a person, a role model for people like me who are in this work. And Jamila, I'm enjoying meeting and getting to know you. We need more young people like yourself helping us to raise the tide. Everybody listening, my name is Casey Bethel. I am a veteran educator, 16 years of high school science teaching. And in 2017, I was the Georgia Teacher of the Year, which means I represented the 115,000 teachers in Georgia, helping to bring some awareness to education topics, both in our state and across the nation.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I guess I want to just ask, what are your viewpoints or thoughts and opinions about teacher leadership?
So I think teacher leadership is incredibly important, and it's a great place for us to start and begin this conversation. We need more teacher leaders. And we need more teachers to see themselves as teacher leaders. Someone told me this before. They said, so often the decisions about teaching and the input about teaching education policy comes from people who are not teachers. And one of the reasons for that is we either don't have a good process for training teacher leaders or identifying teacher leaders, or not enough teachers stepping up and just using their voice, what I like to call teacher voice. Being willing to speak up and represent what they think are the most important concerns, the most important challenges, what are the needs, what are the solutions. I like to approach things. I know the Center for Educational Opportunity also likes to approach things from the bottom up, right? Grassroots, you start small and then the ideas travel up to the top. Well, we need more of that in teaching, and that's about every teacher seeing themselves as a teacher leader.
Right. So as far as the students, what are your thoughts on student engagement and just how we can connect student engagement with STEM education?
So STEM education is another topic that I'm incredibly passionate about. I spent 5 years as a scientist before I became a teacher. All of my degrees and training, at least my initial training, was to be a scientist. And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't fulfilling enough. And then I came to teaching. Right now, I see my work, my personal goal is training the next generation of scientists. Well, how we do that is by getting young people excited about science. So many young people come to my class and they say, Mr. Bethel, I'm not good at science, or I haven't been good at science. They have low confidence in the area of science, but that's because they haven't been engaged. They haven't really tapped into how awesome science is. So what I like to travel around and talk to teachers about is the way we teach science needs to be one that draws young people in. Show them that science is one of the, and listen, as a teacher, I value every subject. Math is important, reading is important, history is important, all those things are incredibly important, but science is one of the subjects that teaches us how to solve new problems. We are training the next generation right now to go into professions that don't exist yet, to answer challenges or problems that we haven't even uncovered yet. So we need to train critical thinkers. We need to train problem solvers. And the way we do that is through science. And the way we draw young people in is by making our lessons engaging, enriching, exciting, creating those firework moments, those magic moments in our classroom.
Right, that is so true. So with training teachers and making sure that they're more student engagement minded when it comes to science, because it's such a hands-on subject. And like you said, we need more students that can activate critical thinking, because they are the next generation in our world. How do we go about diversing the teacher pipeline to make sure that they're able to meet the needs of all students?
So one of the things that can, just a perfect segue, one of the things that can draw young people into wanting to be engaged in science or any subject is seeing people who look like them represented in those areas. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine just this past weekend, and we were talking about how so many young people go through their K through 12 school experience without ever having a minority teacher or a male teacher who doesn't teach gym. The idea that I am a Black man science teacher isn't overlooked by students. They're like, wow, this is the first time this has ever happened. But that doesn't make me special. It just sheds light or opens up my mind to this idea that we need even more of that. There's steps that we can take as an industry. There's steps that we can take as a profession to recruit, to train, and retain more diverse teachers. How do we have more Black teachers, more male teachers, more Latin American teachers, more Asian American teachers, more Black female teachers, and understanding that that's good not just for Black students, but it's good for all students. We don't want our majority students to go through their entire their entire school experience without having a minority teacher either. They lose out on that input, that perspective. All of us are enriched when we get diverse input from diverse people. And that's something that won't happen on its own. We need to be intentional, make that a goal that we want to pursue, put some steps in place so that we can incrementally get closer to achieving that goal. And then let's watch and see how much of a difference it makes for young people.
What are some of the steps do you think that we can take to increase the African-American male population of teachers, or just, like you said, diversifying the different nationalities for teachers in general?
There are a couple of things, right? So one, I asked teachers this. I said, how many times have you tapped a student on your shoulder and said, hey, I think you would make a good teacher? And a lot of teachers say, well, I've never done that. You know, we have the tendency to tap kids on the shoulder and say, I think you're going to make a great doctor one day. I think you'll make a great dentist one day. Or some kid who was a good writer, we'll tap them on the shoulder and say, I think you'll make a good journalist one day. We have the tendency to do that for other careers or other professions. So why don't we do that for teaching? A lot of kids never grow up hearing from anybody that they have the skills or the dispositions or the talents and mindsets to be a good teacher. That's one of the things we can do. And then there's other programmatic things, more policy things we can do to incentivize underrepresented groups to enter this profession. I mean, we incentivize people to do other things. Why don't we incentivize people to consider teaching as a viable career option? And then the third thing is just the way we talk about teaching. You know, let's change the narrative. I mean, teaching gets beat up. Let's just be honest. And nobody listening to this is going to be surprised. Teaching and teachers get beat up in the news or in the press or whatever. And people rail on it as a profession, but that's not true. Most of us who are in teaching have been in it for a long time. And it's because it's rewarding and it's fulfilling and it brings a lot of joy. And it's a happy thing to see young kids get smarter and get more mature. So let's talk about that. Let's publicize that. Let's promote that. And that could be the third arm or the third part of this thing that gets young people thinking, well, I want to do that, right? The reason why people want to do anything is because they think will make them happy. Well, let's talk about teaching and the happiness that comes from it so that more young people will consider joining it in pursuit of that similar happiness.
That is so true. I actually want to ask a question about what your viewpoint is about bad teachers versus good teachers, because I know when I was in high school, I did not think twice about being a teacher. And like you said, I never had a teacher tap me on the shoulder and said, oh, you have really good leadership skills. I can see you, leading the classroom, or you're really good in this subject. I can see you being a language arts teacher or a science teacher. So when we talk about diversifying the teacher pipeline, we want to diversify as far as, having teachers that look like the students and students that look like the teachers, of course, but also diversifying it from having good, well-rounded teachers in the classrooms, because you can be the same color as me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to give me quality, education and help and raise me up in the way that, will be best fit for me in the next segment or transition of my life. And so how can we go about diversifying the teacher pipeline, but including more good teachers, more quality teachers, rather than having teachers that are filling classrooms?
I'm glad you asked that. So first things first, Jamila, I'm listening. Everybody tuning into this is listening to the way you speak. And I think all of us can't wait for the day that you have a classroom or a school, right? You're somebody's principal or somebody's school superintendent because of the way you conduct yourself and the way you communicate. And that just makes me proud. But we need more like you, and it goes back to the same thing I just said. So what happens if we tap all the smart kids on the shoulder and say you should be a doctor or a veterinarian or whatever? Then who are the people who end up in education? I hate even saying this because I do not believe this, but let's address the elephant in the room. For some people, the notion exists that teaching is for people who can't do anything else. If you were not smart enough to be a lawyer, or you were not smart enough to be a doctor, or you were not smart enough to be fill in the blank, then teaching is what's for you. I hate that exists because that's so wrong. If we want to have good teachers, we need to turn that on its head. We need to turn that upside down. We need the smartest and brightest kids to think about being teachers first so that it's not a second thought. And that's one of the things that I always brought to my classroom, not because I'm special, because I'm not. But one of the things I was able to say to my students is, I'm not teaching because I couldn't do something else. I did something else successfully. I didn't leave. I was a scientific researcher at the University of Georgia in the plant genetics mapping laboratory, and I did that successfully. I didn't leave that because I wasn't good at it. I left it because I was looking for fulfillment, and I get the fulfillment from teaching. So I'm smart enough to do anything and be anything, but I choose teaching because I care about you as a student, and I care about your future. And when I say that, the kids in my class sit up straighter. And they pay attention a little bit more, like, all right, well, maybe I should listen to what this guy is saying. We need more of that, and we need to celebrate. We need to professional develop teachers. Once we have people in the classroom, I've gotten better as my teaching career has continued. I wasn't the best teacher my first year either. As much as I knew about science, I had to learn how to teach. But that was because of ongoing professional development that helped me identify my areas of strengths, my areas of weaknesses, and then how do I improve my areas of weakness, and how do I even strengthen my strengths? We need to have everybody on a continuum where they're continuing to try to get better, never becoming satisfied with wherever you are. I've tried to be a better teacher in year 17 than I was in year 16, and that's what we need from everybody.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That definitely answered and explained my question. So what are your thoughts or viewpoints about disparate discipline in schools?
School discipline is another topic that I talk about when I travel around the country, right? Especially in fragile communities. Everywhere, certainly. So I don't want the folks in suburban America or in rural America. Not that there are fragile communities in rural America too, I'm sorry. And affluent communities, I should say. I don't want the folks in affluent communities to tune this part out because this happens there too. And in some cases, it happens even more there. There's data, there's research, there's statistics that show very clearly that the way school discipline is handled is not the same for every group of students. It's uneven, imbalanced in the way that kids are penalized for their mistakes. Let's start with the assumption or the belief. Hopefully everybody listening to this believes that kids make mistakes everywhere. And all types of kids make mistakes. Young, old, black, white, boys, girls, all make mistakes. Some mistakes are big, some mistakes are small. But what the data shows, so that you don't think it's Casey saying it, what the data shows is when the mistake is the same, black boys are penalized far more strongly than any other group. Far more strongly than any other group. And that begins them in a cycle where they get sent to the office for a little bit, and then they get suspended a little bit, then they get expelled from school, and we can track them. The trend at least exists is that we can track these young boys into a cycle that leads to poor decisions later, potential incarceration, even school dropout, yada, yada, yada. We need to own that. We need to know that. And we need to change the way we think about school discipline. I know I'm talking long on this one, But always begin with this, and I can wrap this up with this sentence. When I talk about this all around the country, I begin by asking audiences, what is the purpose of discipline? And I want to try to get people to revamp their thoughts about discipline. School discipline doesn't exist to punish kids. Instead, school discipline should exist to change their behavior. And if the thing that we're doing over and over isn't changing the behavior of the child, then there must be a different alternative that we can find that actually works for that kid. And we got to be creative enough. We got to be flexible enough. We got to be understanding enough to do whatever it takes to change the behavior of that child, because our goal is to keep the kid in school so they keep getting smarter so that they can be a functional member of society later. Right now, that's not happening everywhere. I just try to raise awareness of it.
Right. And that's so true. As you're talking about this, I'm starting to think, and I guess I just want to know, from your experience being a school teacher for so many years, how have you used, or could you give an example of how maybe you had a child in your class that behavior probably wasn't the best behavior, and you knew that they could do better than what they were reacting or responding, and how you encouraged it instead of a more of a discipline type of aspect versus a punishment type of aspect?
I love kids, and I've always chosen to work in some of the most challenging school settings because I think that's where the greatest reward is, right? Remember why I got into this, looking for fulfillment. But so the answer to your question is this. I mean, any one of us can do these two things that I always try to do. I begin my discipline with an idea of equity, right? Equity says that everybody doesn't need the same thing. Everybody needs what they need to be successful. And that works when we talk about other things, right? There's some kids who have different resources, but why doesn't that work when we think about discipline? Discipline. I'm the father of 2 8-year-olds at home, 8-year-old twins. And the way that I discipline my daughter isn't the same way that I discipline my son, not because I'm harder on one of them or the other. I just know that I need to say it in a different way to Harper than I say it to Jackson if I want to accomplish the same goal. Well, we need to be able to treat school and classrooms the same. I used to say to kids all the time, look, when you did a certain thing, I responded this way. And when Johnny did a certain thing, I responded a different way. But that doesn't mean I'm easier on you or easier on Johnny, or I like you more than I like Johnny, or I like Johnny more than I like you. Neither of those is true. I'm responding to the behavior in the way that will produce positive change for you and Johnny, even when that looks different. Being flexible in the way we give out discipline. Anytime, in a lot of the places where we see the most disparate discipline are the places that have these like zero tolerance rules, right? Where if you do this, the punishment is automatic, right? It's very prescriptive. Well, that doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility or equity, right? That's the first thing. And listen, anybody listening to this, I've said all across the country, and I'm saying to your audience today, I'm not making a case for us to be soft on kids. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we can hold kids accountable at the same time that we recognize that each kid might need a different thing. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is I approach discipline with a growth mindset. I just need each kid in my class to be better today than they were yesterday. Something simple as getting out of your seat. So there's some boys who get suspended from school because they get out of their seat too often, right? How crazy is that? And he's in the 3rd grade. He don't even understand yet why sitting still is important. But anyways, I tell a kid, you got out of your seat 15 times yesterday. Today, I just need it to be 12 or less. If it's 12, then today is better than yesterday. And then tomorrow, let's make it 8 or less. And we'll work our way slowly to getting you where you don't get out of your seat at all, right? That works for everything else. We don't expect a kid to go from F to A on a test overnight. Why do we expect this kid's discipline to go from 15 to 0 overnight? Let's scaffold the behavior goal so that the kid has incremental steps so he can recognize his own progress. Let's celebrate the fact that even though you got out of your seat 6 times today, yesterday it was 12 times, so you did better today. You get a high five from me. And there's some teachers who are like, you just gave that kid a high five for getting out of his seat 6 times? I'm like, yeah, because yesterday it was 12, right? And that's what I mean by being flexible and being understanding and doing what it takes to improve the behavior, not just to punish the child.
Yeah, and I think students, they cherish that more when they know that their teachers are for them, and they work better. They work with the teacher because they know truly in their hearts that the teacher is here, to help them, support them, and they're not out to get them. And I think that's like the biggest thing about, teaching and education is that the students, once they know that you support them, that you're for their future, and, that you're on their side, your team, whoever their name is, they're willing to do, whatever you tell them to do, not as like, type of manipulative way, but they're willing to, learn, and they're more engaged in learning, and they're more, engaged in whatever subject that we have, everything that we just been talking about. You will have less behavior problems. And I think that it's important for, parents that are listening to know that, as well as, teachers to know that as well, because as a teacher, you never stop learning. And as you were talking about how, rewarding the child about, the progress, the little progress they may make, as humans and as adults or even younger adults, we're not perfect. And so, to try to make a child or put them in this box to say that they have to operate like this or they're going to get punished for it. Adults don't even operate the best way that they're supposed to. So how can we put this on, younger human beings? And so everything that you said, it was definitely, it added value to just the whole conversation about education opportunity. And I just definitely appreciate you being on this podcast today.
Well, Jamila, I understand now why you have this podcast. I'm glad you recorded yourself that last statement. Perhaps I should be interviewing you because you have all the right ideas and the right dispositions and the right mindset. And you and the rest of your colleagues are going to grow up and lead not just classrooms, but schools, and lead school systems and lead this industry to be, this profession, to be so much better. I hope something I said was helpful. I'm proud to have been a part of this. Thank you to you. Thank you to Dr. Monds. Thank you to Albany State and the Center for Educational Opportunity.
You have just completed the most recent episode of the EdYOUcate podcast. Thank you for listening to the most fired up educational podcast out. Tune in every first Wednesday of each month at 5 p.m. during the 2021 through 2022 academic year.